Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I would like to begin tonight with the Acknowledgement of Country. So I'll begin tonight by respectfully acknowledging the past and present ongoing custodians of the lands on which we work and live. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, their ancestors and their families, and to elders of other communities who may be present, especially here tonight. Okay, so as you know, I'm Christine Craik and I'm the National President of the AASW, and it's my real privilege tonight to be facilitating this evening's session. I'd like to welcome you all to this online session. It's in recognition of National Reconciliation Week and is in part one of our series of social work practice issues under COVID-19 social work. I'd like to recognise actually the impact that COVID-19's had on all of the members and on the broader Australian community in these very challenging times. We want to commend the incredible work that social workers are doing every day, working with some of the most marginalised and disenfranchised individuals and groups and communities. The innovation and commitment shown by social workers over this time has been absolutely amazing. Social workers are now, and as we go through the recovery, needed more than ever. The AASW will continue to support members and strive towards professional excellence and social justice in all that we do. So tonight we'll hear from our presenters. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions in the chat function in Zoom. The session's being recorded and it'll be available to members who aren't here tonight as well. I'm going to start by introducing our three panelists, and I'll go through and introduce all three of them, and then I'll hand over to Linda to lead off the discussions, and then Linda will introduce and facilitate as we go through. So tonight our three presenters, and in no particular order, Linda Ford. Linda is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Director on the board. She holds that position. She's an Aboriginal woman from North Queensland with 25 years experience as a social worker in rural, remote and urban areas. Linda's a Bigambul woman and would like to also acknowledge the Kalkadoon people of Northwest Queensland where she grew up. Linda's particularly passionate about child protection. She's worked there for 17 years in this area of social work. Following this work, Linda commenced working in Queensland Health in a variety of roles, including Director of Social Work for Northwest Hospital and Health Service. Linda currently works in mental health. Previously, she's been a guest lecturer and an adjunct lecturer for James Cook University in North Queensland in the areas of social work theory and ethical practice, and more recently has presented papers domestically and internationally in relation to Aboriginal health. Linda's also recently been made the chair of the International Federation of Social Workers' inaugural Indigenous Committee, and this is some honour, I can tell you, to come from us. Linda also chairs our Reconciliation Action Plan, has been really involved in that. So welcome to Linda. Josephine Lee. Jo has had an extensive career in social work and has made a significant contribution to her field of practice. Josephine is a Gujula woman who's held senior roles in health, education and child protection, and she's a very active social worker and very well regarded in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. She provides ongoing support and advocacy across the board. In 2018, Josephine was awarded the Northern Territory Social Worker of the Year Award, and it was very well deserved. Welcome, Josephine. And last but not least is AJ Williams-Chen. AJ is of Wiradjuri and Watchabullock background and manages his own cultural awareness training. His own consultancy, Guraway Ganyi Consultancy. He specialises in the provision of Aboriginal cultural awareness training, mental health first aid, cultural mentoring programs, and Aboriginal workforce development activities. AJ first qualified as a nurse before going on to attain a Bachelor of Social Work Honours, there you go, he saw the light, at Victoria University, and a Masters of Social Work from Melbourne University. AJ is also very active on our Reconciliation Action Plan steering group. In 2019, AJ won the NAIDOC Community Award. 2 years in a row, in 2011 and in 12, he won the Mental Health Matters Award for 2 different projects, I've been told. He didn't just recycle. And in 2015, he won the Victorian Emerging Indigenous Leader Award. So welcome to the program, AJ. Also with us, we have our AASW Policy Officer, Tegan Leader, who's behind the scenes managing the technical aspects of the session, and she'll be directing your questions to the panel later on. So we have with us tonight a brilliant group of presenters this evening, and I'd like to thank all the presenters for making time to do this, and everyone for making time to participate. So I'll hand now over to Linda to take off with the chat.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome everybody, and particularly welcome the other presenters. I know that I've spoken to you both, and you're both looking forward to talking with us all tonight. It's a really good opportunity when we get together and just have a bit of a chat about what's happening for us, especially in the social work space. So I'd like to start off with just a conversation about reconciliation, given that it is Reconciliation Week. And I wanted to commence by a quote from the CEO of Reconciliation Australia, Karen Mundine, who said that this theme, In This Together, reinforces that we all have a role to play when it comes to reconciliation, and in playing our part, we collectively build relationships and communities that value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, histories and culture. And I think that we've seen that more than ever this year about how communities need to come together, in particularly over issues that affect all of us. So in terms of reconciliation, we've seen huge improvements over the past 10, 20, 30 years. So we've seen more and more companies signing up to Reconciliation Australia to become responsible to improve their interactions with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We've seen more appropriate representation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in media such as ABC Black Comedy, Bush Mechanics, NITV, A Favourite of Mine, Mystery Road, Top End Weddings, radios, podcasts, and that was something when I was a child you just did not see. The only time you saw an Aboriginal person on TV was wearing a lap and carrying a spear. Also in Closing the Gap, so it's on the national agenda for health and recognition of the diversity of health standards in our communities and what we need to do as a nation. Legally, looking at rights to land, traditional food, participation in decision making about land, especially in the areas of mining. In education, we've seen greater numbers of our people finishing school, finishing high school. More of our culture, our traditional languages are becoming part of curriculums in school, which has been fantastic. Politically, recognition through Mabo Day, which was yesterday, NAIDOC, Reconciliation Week, which is now nationally celebrated. And I think we need to take a moment to realise that we have come a long way in the last few years, and we can start to see those successes. The road would have been more difficult, I believe, if we hadn't, and if not impossible, if we hadn't had the support of all of our fellow Australians. We have been in partnership, and we have continued to be in partnership for many years. We have had some difficult conversations. The Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, RICADEC, in 1991 was a difficult conversation back then and has now become a new conversation. The Bringing Them Home report in 1997 was a difficult conversation and affected many Australians, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. The subsequent apology to Australian Indigenous people on the 13th of February 2008 by the then PM Kevin Rudd was an acknowledgement of some of the past pain that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people needed to endure. We're having difficult conversations right now talking about Aboriginal deaths in custody, and we will continue to have these difficult conversations into the future. These difficult conversations are important when you're dealing with people's belief systems, underlying values, and all of those things that are significantly important to people and their way of life. There are many ways to have conversations such as these, but I think it's important that we remember that you do not win any battles by being disrespectful violent or judgmental. And unfortunately, we're seeing this quite a lot in other parts of the world. I think in moving forward, it's important to celebrate their successes, which is why I started with some of the things that we have, some of the areas that we've come so far in. I, as an Aboriginal person, am tired of hearing the negative. I'm tired of hearing the high rates of Aboriginal and Torres Islander suicides. I'm tired of hearing how many Aboriginal and Torres Islander children are in care or in custody. How many high rates of Aboriginal and Torres Islander people, adults, are in custody. The poor literacy rates, the poor health rates. I would like to see a balanced report, the good and the bad. I want to hear about all the things that are improving, that are being achieved, that are challenging lives as well as challenging things that still need our attention. When was the last time you saw a report on how many Aboriginal and Torres Islander children were returned to their families from Child Protection Services? When was the last time you heard a report about how many Aboriginal and Torres Islander people did not reoffend and were not reincarcerated? When was the last time you heard a report about how many Aboriginal and Torres Islander children completed senior high school or university? If all the questions that we ask, if we ask all the questions that are both positive and negative, we build an expectation of the whole picture, not just the negative. We create an environment that celebrates the successes and motivates us to conquer the challenges. If we teach our children that the world for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is a negative place, then what are we building for the future? Thank you. I'll pass now on to Jo, and she will continue with her presentation. Thank you.
So Josephine has a bit of a different style, but hopefully it will complement Linda. And so I do a head, heart, soul approach to when I get the opportunity to talk about Aboriginal matters. And first of all, I just want to be respectful to Linda and just add a little bit more to what she's talked quite deeply about in relation to reconciliation. And obviously I'll be stating it very much as from an Aboriginal person's point of view. Not as a social worker, but me as a person that lives in this society. What is really clearly coming out, and COVID is being particularly a pressure cooker, and it's made people have across the world incredible feelings around what is in your control and what is out of your control. There would not be a human being that has not been impacted by COVID-19. And given what we are seeing in the way of the incredible grief and outrage and we cannot not be acknowledging that people's PTSD around racism is being triggered. And so this is, although it's a crisis in so many ways, it is often in crisis that the magnificence of human beings can do finally the healing that is necessary, okay? And when I talk about, as an Aboriginal person, and saying healing, we need to stop, as Linda was pointing out before, the stories are often about demeaning, devaluing and despising and saying a whole lot of other D words there, but Aboriginal people must be the most damned people on the planet, right? Even though there's been improvements in relation to what we see in the level of disadvantage, etc., that we are still the most damned people on the planet. I truly believe that. But I want to say, as an Aboriginal person, we are also the most resilient people on the planet. And so when we start to talk the glad story versus the bad stories, we need to be acknowledging we are one of the most magnificent races cultural ethnic groups, I'll rephrase that, on the planet, that we have survived till to this day. And so when we're talking history is the last second that's just past us, okay? Because it's very easy for people to think history was long, long ago and not feel that they take any responsibility of what happens now, okay? So we also know that there's the ongoing impact of colonisation. And being a person that lives in the Northern Territory, I'm originally from North Queensland, and grew up witnessing, probably grew up in one of the most racist towns in this country, and witnessed how Aboriginal people, or people of colour, or people who may be different to the main people in the town, weren't allowed into pubs or allowed into people's yards, etc. So I had very early in my life instilled a distrust for mainstream and white people. I'm being very frank about that. And so I know in my part in relation to reconciliation that I too have to take responsibility for building the bridge of trust that we all need to build amongst each other, because that's also very important for healing, true healing to happen. And I'm also guilty of being one of the people that is also struggling with, yes, there was an apology, but what is it now looking like as in the way of healing, okay? And it's not just about Aboriginal people having to do the healing because everyone perceives them as broken. It's actually about a society that has to repair the wrong that needs to be eradicated, because we've only recently witnessed cruelty acted out and it was condoned. Does that make sense? In that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I also want to add, and please tell me to wind up, because again, I'm doing this from the head, heart and soul, is that when I'll touch base with Linda, I really wanted to stress that, and Linda's used the word of difficult conversation, I would argue courageous conversation, right? Every one of us needs to find the courage to walk through a difficult situation, to come out the other end, all of us a better human being, okay? Because to make a good society, it requires everyone to play a part. And to be playing a part, this is the challenge for us Australians and going to social workers. People must feel truly valued and respected so that they believe they actually can contribute, okay? And to feel that, this is the challenge for me, and then also what I'm putting it out to social workers. It has to move beyond case management and people seeing themselves as clients, but that we actually all have a shared humanity, and every single person has moments of vulnerability, and all of us are carrying a hell of a load of worry, particularly with COVID-19, but also hitting us in our face that racism is alive and thriving in our societies, which is such a disappointment. So I'll just stop at that now.
Thank you very much for that, Jo. I don't think you were that far away from what I was saying, so that worked out well. Okay, so let's hear from AJ.
I would say thanks to Linda and Josephine for leading in to some of the conversations, because to be honest with you all, we actually haven't planned our speeches or talks, but the themes are quite similar. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what exactly is reconciliation and what it does mean to me. I don't think reconciliation is an easy concept to define in just a few words to start off with, but it is about bringing together Indigenous and non-Indigenous people with the purpose of achieving forgiveness, knowing the truth, providing justice, but also encouraging love and healing at the same time. There are many. I think it's about time that Australia is ready to hear the truth and acknowledge the truth, and it's really important, because I just go back to two themes that are only a couple of years ago. One was the NAIDOC theme, which was listen to our stories, and that's only a theme from 2 years ago. And the reconciliation theme of last year was grounded in truth. These are concepts that we've been asking non-Indigenous people to think about for years and years, but they're just the last two kind of national themes, which is telling you that these conversations are still not being told. and we need to start actually having them. And I do like the word that Josephine used, the, what was it for?
Courageous conversation.
Courageous conversations. And I think they are kind of courageous conversations. I just said Australia should be ready to come into terms with the truth of history, acknowledge it, and allow the actual history of Aboriginal people to be told by Aboriginal people themselves. Our stories must be heard, understood, and incorporated into the narratives of Australian history. The history that does include land dispossession, violence, forcible removal, and the active policies and practices that segregated, assimilated, took away our rights, failed to pay stolen wages, caused the unjust incarcerations and the deaths in custody. But we need to understand that, as Josephine said, this history isn't from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This is history that people in my family are still going through now. I'll share a little story with you that anytime I go home to visit my family, my auntie, who's only about 8 years older than me, will sit around and talk about her still living on the mission and having one of her kids taken in the car. Now that kid's never been found. This is the story that my auntie shares all the time. And as a family, we wonder where my uncle is, but we don't know. We've never been able to locate him. So when people say this stuff happened years and years ago, we're talking about people whose lives are affected right now. But I think by denying the history in the storytelling process and the continual racism that does continue in Australia towards Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, that is still a huge obstacle to overcome. But we are starting and making progress towards it. But I do think that there's strategies and things that we can do together. And I think that one of the first, I've got 4 things to think about in part of the reconciliation process. And that is one, that as social workers, we need to recognise the history of social work on Aboriginal people in the past. And it's not about laying blame to any time, person or place, but it's about breaking down the structures that were put into place that we're all currently still working in. So it is about looking at how does the policies and processes work in child protection? How do they work in juvenile justice settings? How do they work in the court and law? How do they work when I work with people with disabilities? Because these old kind of colonial white structures are still there. So we need to be able to challenge those structures to make changes. It's about allowing Aboriginal people and policies for us. We've kind of been, I always say that we're round people that have been trying to pushed into square boxes. And it's about actually, let's relook at the box. It's about, as social workers in professions, let's relook at some of the boxes to make sure that these round people can actually fit in. The second thing is listen to our stories, listen to our history. Realise that the past is not as far back as you think, and the stories told by Aboriginal people are the stories that make up the true Aboriginal history. Many events and life issues still impact on Aboriginal people today. The second thing is, I would always say, challenge non-Indigenous people telling you about Aboriginal history. And I'm not saying you have to be rude about it. I'm not saying you have to, tell people off, but it's about, I hear so many times non-Indigenous people sharing Aboriginal history, but I want to question them all the time by going like, who gave you permission to share this story? Where or what community does this story actually come from? And if they're telling you about events and they're telling you about certain events and periods of history and time that seem to happen years ago, stop and ask them to explain things to you like, well, how does that impact on people today? Because I think what is missing in a lot of education, in higher education, in schools, is that we are starting to talk about history, but it is still talked about as history, which means that people walk out. I'm just talking, for example, if you try to talk to a kid in year 10 today who's born in 2004 and talk about the 1967 referendum, that kid's going to learn that as history and go, oh, that happened years ago, it had nothing to do with me. But unless that teacher stops and explains, well, how does it impact on people today? Well, let's think about 1967. Oh, wait, they're the elders in our community now. This is that in their lives, they weren't counted in the census. They weren't allowed to participate in society. So it's only in their lifetime have they been allowed to do these things. So it is about actually teaching impact. The other thing I need to say is that it's about time that we, you know, challenge and stand up to any racism that you actually hear, see, feel, note that people are saying. And I said, to really show that you understand what reconciliation is all about, you have to be brave enough, strong enough, and willing enough to show others that you do understand Aboriginal history. You do understand how it still affects people today. You need to be able to ask questions to protect and learn about Aboriginal culture and our history, and be willing, allow our stories to be told and heard by Aboriginal people. And with this, and with us working together, we will be able to help reconcile. We'll be able to actually bring our history and Aboriginal history together and actually realise, well, if we acknowledge what's actually happened, now we can move together in the future. And it is about, you know, I always say to people, and I'd run lots of cultural awareness training, and I'm saying, like, you can't just go to one cultural awareness training and go, I know everything about working with Aboriginal people. It is a learning process, but people need to be willing and open to start that process, and honest about where you actually sit in that history as well, as an individual and as a profession. That's all I've got, Linda.
Well, thank you very much. That was really good. Thanks, Joe and AJ. It was both really good. There's probably a couple of points. One is that I think history is important. I think as an Aboriginal person, we know that history is important, and we'll always know that. That's just the way that we are built, that we're grown up, we're taught. I'm not sure that for younger people growing up now, that history is as important, number one. And I think that the other thing is that it's really hard sometimes, and I've found this, to have the challenging conversations or the courageous conversations with people when they are just not ready to hear what you're saying. And so I become quite frustrated at times when, and I had a comment today because I posted a particular meme about about what white privilege looks like, and I thought it was actually quite beautiful how it articulated it so well. And somebody who I've known for many years commented that, you know, well, that's no excuse for rioting and etc. And I said, well, you actually just missed the whole point of the meme that I just said. So, but I didn't say that. I actually articulated it. Well, you know, that's the criminal part of protesting, because people become frustrated. I said, but there is a whole other part where people actually, you know, need some validation and are unhappy with the way that things are happening in their particular country at the time. So yeah, I think that sometimes it's great to want to have those conversations, but I don't know if everybody in our society is ready to hear those conversations. But I think that there are more and more people wanting to hear those conversations.
Can I respond, Linda? There's a couple of things. AJ, thank you for what you said. And I'll just start with AJ. There was two things that you reminded me about that I forgot to say. They were really important to me, and I believe for other Aboriginal people. Because with the COVID-19, we've been linking a lot across the Northern Territory, and I get the privilege to hear from remote communities, and I get to hear how they perceive what's going on in that. And I wanted to share what many remote communities, and I'm talking about communities that have different languages, different cultural groups. And the shared theme is we have an imbalance going on right now. COVID-19 is a result of imbalance on our planet, okay? And most Indigenous people would say this was coming. This is to be expected, and the planet is saying, I am not happy with what is happening to me. So that's the first point I wanted to stress. The second thing that AJ also reminded me about, for Aboriginal people, what has happened is the storylines and songlines have been disrupted. And so for young people, Linda, when you're highlighting, one of the results of cultural breakdown and modernity and all the other things that every human being gets distracted by is that there is possible disruption and breaking down of storyline and songline. And one of the things that I'm incredibly proud about Northern Territory for having the toughest, taking a stand first up and the toughest borders is to protect the all those people, not just the elderly that carry all those stories, etc., but it is every Aboriginal person, because this is what I want to be really clear about. Even though your culture is starting to be eroded, etc., you need to trust that it is all there within you, okay? And you just need to rediscover it. You need to have the people around you to believe, and it's there, okay? Remember that Aboriginal culture doesn't die and disappear. It just goes dormant for a period in some communities. But I tell you, in most communities, what I have the privilege to witness in the Northern Territory, it is thriving and it's clear the language is getting stronger, right? So that's some of the good stories I want to throw in there about we're on a healing journey right now. The whole planet is. And I believe Aboriginal people are already got leaps and bounds ahead of non-Indigenous people. So we're going to be fine if we can keep COVID-19 from hitting us. We're going to get through this as stronger people. Okay? Just had to put that out there.
Thank you for that. AJ, did you want to respond?
No, I don't know. I want to respond. You know me, I want to add.
Adding's okay.
I think I just want to add to, you know, there's so many social workers and that I come to training that go, well, how do we help close the gap and how do we help close some of these gaps? And I say now, it's stop thinking about closing gaps nationally. Think about closing gaps within families. Like you're working with individual families at times, and you know, and our 53% of our population is under the age of 25. So our biggest population is young people, and it's making sure that our young people are healthy, making sure that this young person can get to year 12, that they are supported to go to university or TAFE. People forget this is often the first generation of kids that actually, Aboriginal kids that are getting to year 12. It's the first generation of Aboriginal people that are often participating in the economy on money that's not welfare orientated. So they're learning about things like superannuation, and they're learning about things that have never been taught in families before. It is also about, if I can help that family, if I can help that child not go into the child protection system, that might be the first kid in that family unit that's never been in the child protection system. If I can get them to mentoring programs and, you know, stop kids from getting to juvenile justice settings, then I'll be able to close the gap within that particular family injustice. If I can, if I can support people, you know, getting into different professions, then we're going to start looking at employment gaps being reduced. It's a bit of a challenge that I say to all social workers, is that don't think about trying to close the whole gap nationally now, because we can't. We've shown close the gap doesn't work. Oh, I don't say it doesn't work, but we know the gaps haven't been closed. Well, we're kind of not on track with nearly anything. I think we're on track with getting kids to year 12 and immunisations, but we haven't closed any of the gaps set in 2008. But what we can do is start to close gaps within family units. And we can only do that if we truly understand how this family works, how they live, where they sit in history, and be able to help close, as I said, gaps in family units. And I reckon if every social worker had one Aboriginal family that they could help close the gap with, then we could see nationally that this gap could be actually reduced.
I think you've really touched on something there too, AJ. I've found in all of my social work practice, it's about relationships. And I know for me, I've had the best relationships with people for Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and non-Indigenous people when I've actually had a relationship with them. I've actually cared about them. I've shown an interest in them. But when you're working with Aboriginal communities, I find that you actually need to go a little bit further than that. You need to have an understanding about the background of that community. How did that community commence, for example? You know, so lots of communities didn't, you know, just weren't there originally. You know, Palm Island, for example, was a penal colony. So that's, you know, that history has a huge impact on how people live their lives today. You look at old Dumaji was moved. Dumaji used to be on the river, and then there was a cyclone, so they moved. What family groups live in that community? Who's the prominent people? Who are the people in that community to go to for really sound advice? So building your own network as a social worker and having an understanding about the background, like you said, of families, I think is just, even before you meet families, having an understanding about that particular community. And I think the other thing is that one of the biggest flaws I have seen in practice is people deal with the individual instead of dealing with the family and the community. I never talk to Aboriginal people unless I know where they're from, what their background is. I always say, do you want somebody else with you? If you don't want anybody else with you, do you want a liaison officer with you? I'm an Aboriginal person. I'm happy to stay here with you because, you know, we're together. Because I have a really good understanding about how kinship groups work and how community impact on decision making for people. I've had people who've refused medical treatment because family had a death and they have to travel. And you just need to understand that and say, okay, well then how do we make you as well as possible so then you can travel to that funeral? It's not a choice whether you're going to stay here for treatment or not. That's not your choice. The choice we have is how can we help you facilitate that cultural need. So yeah, I think there's huge learnings to still be had.
Yeah, these are all amazingly practical things. I mean, I'm listening to all this. A lot of the themes that are coming through in the questions are around education, are around how social workers that aren't Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social workers can participate in decolonising practices, can educate themselves. How can the AASW be the go-to place and, you know, sort of set the bar for this sort of stuff around the helping professions? So, you know, it's amazing. You're talking about the questions here that people are asking, which is just terrific.
Yeah, and I think we absolutely need to address what's happening in America and now Australia as well in terms of the Black Lives Matter, and I think that's been an issue for many years since. Like I remember being at uni and reading the Ricketic report, which was a Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody in '91, and that started I think it started in '86 or '87 or something like that. It went for a number of years. And there was a number of recommendations from that report, and the majority, if any, were never implemented. So, which was unfortunate because we may not be in the position that we are now in terms of deaths in custody. But it's absolutely a very real issue at the moment. And if you are part of an Aboriginal community, you would have had some experiences of yourself or your family members being in a situation where you need to be very careful, coming to the attention of really any government professional, but in particular police, which is unfortunate because that's not the society that we want to live in today, basically. So yeah, do Joe and AJ want to comment a little bit about what's happening at the moment in terms of Aboriginal deaths in custody?
I'll just, I won't talk too long about it, but just to remind people that with what's going on across the planet, and it's clear that racism is alive and thriving, and that particularly people of colour or black people or people who are minorities or etc. are clearly suffering at the hands of abuse of power in varying ways and that. And I wanted to just make sure I expanded on one of your points, Linda, about relationship and that. because I see often like many words get rolled out like it's the latest trendy thing, but people don't walk the talk. Okay, this is what I want to stress. When you are inquiring about people's communities and etc., it's with the genuine intent of truly wanting to understand and be the best support or tool for change and meaningful change for people that are probably struggling so much more than you. And I have to say, I fall in the privilege now because I'm on a damn good salary, but most of my family are still extremely disadvantaged, right? And so may have a good salary, but I do whatever I can to help my family to not have to suffer unnecessarily in that. So as an Aboriginal person, that's one of the obligations, but it's also an honourable thing to do. Help out others that may be struggling if you can. The other thing that I also wanted to really stress and make sure, because people seem to grasp for tricks or what is the latest thing as to how, as one human being to another, and trying to achieve a goal of good change for someone, is remember the importance of being extraordinary. We, all of us, have the capacity to be extraordinary. And so often you can't offer relationships of longevity and being there in the long term. Most social workers would have to be honest about they're not in there for the long term, and etc. So you have to think about how is it that you can be a blessing in someone's life that you do not, for example, you do not cause any further harm and trauma and distrust and just another dreadful experience of cruelty or etc. To truly, what AJ was also stating, truly lifting people, and that they are able to be as reach their potential as much as possible. And a good reminder also around social workers need to think, remember, we're meant to be doing ourselves out of a job, but one of the things that COVID-19 has made pretty clear is social workers are essential. Okay, so we've got jobs for a long time in that sense. But as for the impact on Aboriginal people, as AJ was saying, that really important word, impact, really think about the part you play every day in someone's life who may involuntarily or has to, out of desperation or vulnerability, ask you for help. That's it.
Thank you, AJ.
Yeah, I just want to, can I respond to a couple of the comments that are coming through?
Yes, please do.
I can say, someone's asked, where do they find out about more history? They're a non-Aboriginal and non-Australian person that has, where do you start learning about Aboriginal history? I would say, start talking to Aboriginal people to start off with. Meet Aboriginal people, go to the local Aboriginal health service and make some sort of contact. Start watching TV shows like Living Black, or Linda or Josephine, just jump in.
Mystery Road.
Yes, I love Mystery Road. NITV?
NITV. Any movies that are around about Aboriginal culture. I think that we need to Google, find out information on different websites, Reconciliation Australia website. Have a look at informing yourself and finding out information, and then even getting a mentor from an Aboriginal community to actually help mentor you through your learning process.
Great idea.
Is one. And I think that someone else has said, you know, how do young people learn from the lessons of history? I think it is about the schools that I work with is actually making sure all history teachers, when they're teaching history, actually do talk about impact. It is about, but also we also need to educate young Aboriginal people on Aboriginal history as well. And I do have to say that because some of the schools that I work with, there has been a dislocation that the young Aboriginal kids are identifying as Aboriginal, but their parents don't know much about Aboriginal history because it was denied to them. So I do think there's also another level there where we need to educate, even though they're Aboriginal, they don't know much about their Aboriginality. So it is about getting them to understand Aboriginal history as well, and the reasons why them and their family don't know some of these things. I think there was another comment. Anyone else can just jump up. I really think that, you know, I agree that maybe there needs to be some sort of group for non-Indigenous people to learn more about Aboriginal, like a AASW group that may need to get to talk about it. But the only issue that I have with that is that I think we're tired of non-Indigenous people talking about our stories without actually having any Aboriginal input into it. So the last thing you want to do is create a non-Indigenous group that excludes Aboriginal voices from being heard and spoken to in that group. We've seen big blow-ups in the media over the last couple of years on the Sunrise program, and with Kerry Ann Kennelly on another show in the morning, where you've got a bunch of white non-Indigenous people all talking about Aboriginal issues with no Aboriginal voice in it. But I do think there could be a place where you've got some Aboriginal facilitators that facilitate discussions for non-Indigenous social workers around practice models or different understandings of policies and practices that have happened in the past, and how does that impact on people today, and how can we actually change some of our practices?
Sorry.
I just want to say, Christine, I've had people also approach me, and they're quite fearful of asking just everyday questions about Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people and culture and stuff. And it's because they've had bad experiences when they've spoken to other people. And so my advice would be, continue to ask the questions of different people until you find somebody who is willing to share their story and to be your mentor, because there are people out there that will do that. And I always invite people, I always say to people, there is no silly questions. And people often say to me, this is a stupid question, but can you tell me X? And I'll say, look, there's no stupid questions. This is the way it is for me, in my experience. So always continue to ask, even if you've had a bad experience with one person, you may have a great experience with the next person. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. The other thing, just quickly, is, because I know we're starting to get towards the end of it, and we want to answer some more questions, is that don't forget also that what my experience as an Aboriginal person growing up in northwest Queensland is not going to be the same experience as somebody who grew up in the Kimberleys or somebody who grew up in Sydney, for example. So just being conscious of that. Our stories are all very different. There are some commonalities. Our relationship with country is really important, and our relationship with family and our part in our family is very important. So those are some of the similarities, but you need to understand that there's going to be lots of different stories from lots of different people because they've had a different experience.
Yeah, I was going to say before that I know Linda is on the cusp of, or the verge of, organising with this new community online platform that's going to take off in a couple of weeks, organising to have all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social workers who are part of the AASW as part of their own online group. And I think whatever the conversations come out from that group of social workers, they should be the ones that lead the ways in which non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social workers can participate in some of these things. You know, I just think.
Yeah, we also want to look at doing some more with CDUP as well. So offering some more opportunities for training, etc. And just on the practical things, because I think that's I know for me as a practitioner starting out, some of the basic things that you learn about, you know, if people offer you food, what are you supposed to do? What's respectful? What's not respectful? You know, I've had previous workers working alongside me who just walk into people's houses, don't even knock on the door. Like, and because they're Aboriginal, and you wouldn't do that with a non-Indigenous person. What makes you think it's okay to do it with an Indigenous person? So just those sorts of, little understandings. I'm sure that Joe's heard these stories and AJ's heard as well.
That's why I'm having to work out how to be polite right now. Because one of the other things I do have to raise, because social workers have done it to me when I was a kid, and that's how I discovered social work existed, and I decided I was going to be a better social worker than the ones I interacted with at that time. And it really, I don't know if Linda and AJ have had this experience, is when the social worker says, you don't look Aboriginal. Okay, it is not for them to make such a judgment, and they may not realise what it is that you have had to cop from racist white people because you happen to have an Aboriginal family. Okay, so Linda, I suspect I wouldn't respond very well to that question if it was put to me again. And so I just wanted to share honestly why sometimes people can react badly.
Can I just add too, I think that when we do intake and assessment with clients, one of the questions we do ask is, are you Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? It's kind of a mandatory question. I would say two things about this. One, for goodness sake, know where the Torres Strait Islands actually are. Because I do training and ask people where the Torres Straits, and they go, I don't know. Do you ask that question in your assessment? Yeah. Well, I go, well, don't bother asking if you don't exactly know where they actually are. It's also, don't do tokenistic kind of cultural safety things. Like I walk into organisations and there's a flag sitting up on people's desk, and I go, so what do the colours and symbols mean on the Torres Strait Islander flag? I don't know. So why the bloody hell have you got it sitting there? You want me to feel culturally safe, yet you can't tell me what these symbols mean? Then no, I don't feel culturally safe. It is a tokenistic gesture. So it is about making sure that even when you ask that question, are you Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? It is asking, what you're really asking me is, do I feel culturally safe to answer this question right now? That's what you're actually asking me. Because sometimes people go, you're not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, are you? That's not the question that was supposed to ask. And the best suggestion I would say when someone answers that question, whether it's a yes or a no, is just say thank you. Because people, my skin colour, we get some verbal diarrhea from workers. Like, you Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? Yep. Really? You don't look it. Are you Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? Oh, how far back does it go? Are you Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? Yep. What percentage are you?
Yes.
These are the most common responses that I hear on a daily basis. And I don't think it's done with malicious intent, but I hear it so often that I am beginning to find it racist, because how many times do we need to tell people? It's also, just with that identifying question before you do the assessment, is know why you're actually asking it. It isn't for funding. It isn't for government benefits. It's so that health organisations can, one, screen for conditions for Aboriginal people, and the second major reason is for that our practice does change. One thing I want to make it very clear is that I cannot stand workers that say we treat everybody the same. We're not all the same. We treat everybody individually. There's a big difference between individual and being very careful of the words, because Aboriginal people, we need often a lot of hand ups, not a lot of handouts. So the big difference is, there's a big difference between a hand up and a hand out. A hand up means that we're not on the same playing field to start off with. So what we're getting at subsidised rates, or that scholarship, or that, it gives us a hand up so that we're on the even playing field. A hand out means we're actually at the same playing field and we're getting something better or more. So there's particular words that I think social workers need to learn in order to help de-escalate the psychological distress that Aboriginal people have when they're doing intake and assessment, because once you can establish trust with that particular individual, then you can actually do your job.
Yeah, that's great.
That's lovely. That is lovely. I'm noticing the time. I can't believe that we've been on for almost an hour, because I think, I mean, not that I'm saying you guys have got nothing better to do, but it would have been fantastic to have this webinar go for a couple of hours. There's just so many questions. I know that the team behind these productions goes through the questions and tries to answer them online for people, although they may need a bit of a hand for some of these questions, I think. I'm reticent to wrap this up because I feel that the conversation is really only just starting, and it's just such a rich conversation. But at the same time, I know we've got 4 minutes or something like that.
Can you
So
allow me one more comment, Christine?
please, I was just going to ask last comments.
Partly because I just saw someone's point about, you know, Aboriginal people often being described as drunks, etc. Stereotype to the most, to the point where you rob people of dignity in the way you communicate, okay? And let me really be clear. My mother, who's an Aboriginal woman, has never touched a drop of alcohol in her life and will never do so, right? Her mother, my grandmother, Aboriginal woman, taken from her mother, and all the incredible grief of her siblings taken to Palm Island, right? So I have a strong connection to Palm Island, the most traumatised community on the planet it was. And I want to stress about everyone has to stop saying it's an Aboriginal problem, alcoholism, etc. Australia has a problem with alcoholism. Let's be clear about that point, right? And also we have alcohol fuel violence being done by all people of different backgrounds in this country, okay? So I really ask of the many social workers that we have on right now, seriously stop perpetuating what is a lie about Aboriginal people.
Just to add to that, Josephine, you often hear things like, oh, Aboriginal women, Aboriginal women in domestic violence, and it's a big Aboriginal problem. Most of the perpetrators are non-Indigenous men, not Aboriginal men. So it's not an Aboriginal problem. It's actually a community problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to, because we are running out of time, I think that we will have an undertaking that if there's questions that need to be answered, that we will do our best to answer all of the questions that have come up tonight. Yeah. So please don't go away thinking that you're not going to get your question answered. We're happy to respond. And Kristen and I will work out how that's going to happen so that it'll either be a written or some other medium. And I think you're right, Christine. I think people do really want to be involved in the conversation and have more opportunities for more conversations. Just to hear, because perhaps people don't have access to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are willing to have these types of frank conversations. So I'm happy to look at doing something further on down the track as well.
That's great. I think we'll be typing the answers to these questions and it'll go out with the recording of this session is how it'll probably work. So as we're wrapping up, we just wanted to make a few announcements. Linda, do you want to talk very briefly about where the RAP's up to, the next version of the RAP?
Yes, so the AASW is on its third RAP and we have just had confirmation that the Reconciliation Australia has signed it off. So they're happy, so we will be progressing more. And this RAP in particular really focuses on the role of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social workers and supporting and empowering them as the AASW. So
fantastic.
Fantastic.
And we hope in the next month that new version of the RAP will be out there because Reconciliation Australia now just has to have a look at the design that we want to use. They're happy with all the words. We just need the design to be passed, which is great. Yeah. Okay, well, I know. So, yes, Jo, go.
I want to make sure everyone knows Josephine gets a bit passionate and growling, but I want to acknowledge there's a whole lot of social workers who do good work every day, and I want to thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
That's fantastic. I want to thank the three of you for being so generous with your time and with your comments today. I mean, I know every time you come out and you talk about your own experiences and things like that, it takes courage, it takes energy, it takes you back, you know, it takes from you is what it does. And I think everyone here, I mean, we've been getting a lot of comments from people saying thank you very much and how wonderful it is to see three amazing Aboriginal leaders in the AASW talking this way. So I think this won't be the first of these the last of these conversations that we have. It's just been absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for your time, but thank you for your generosity, really, above everything else. That's been great. So before we go then, I think there's some slides that need to come up about what's happening in the AASW, just very briefly. Yep, so there's a few other Q&A sessions coming up. Mental health on the 18th of June. I know I was talking to the CEO today and we were planning another live Facebook session next week for teaching social work at university at the moment and how we're managing that online, especially in the practice skills space. It's quite difficult. We're looking at doing that next week, although that hasn't been organised yet. So we're going to continue to use this platform as an opportunity to bring everybody together and learn more about other fields of practice, share resources and experience, and learn from each other. I mean, you know, some of the practical things that were said today, I want to bottle it. I want to bottle some of this stuff that was said today. It was so good. Is there another slide? Yes. 10th of June, Social Workers for Climate Action. This is a 3-part series for people that are interested in it. You can register for one or you can register for all of the series. The registrations are open now. So just talking about climate change and the impact on the people that you work with and your organisation and how social work services will change in this space. And it'll be interesting to see if there's a connection there. You know, Joe, you were talking before about how Aboriginal people knew this was coming. Well, I wonder if there's a connection between COVID-19 and climate change, you know, and the whole thing. Everything is so connected, but that'll, you know, more of that'll be discussed in the Climate Action webinar program. I've booked in for that. I really want to see what it's about. And our community hub, Social Work Australia, is coming, and AASW will soon launch this fantastic initiative, this online community hub, which will connect everybody. And I cannot tell you how exciting it's going to be for everybody to be connected in this way. Really, it's going to revolutionise social work across the country. So that's towards the end of the month, maybe the last week of the month, I think we're looking at launching that. So be very, very exciting and couldn't be more timely with everything that's going on with us all being stuck at home. Yes, and please complete the online survey. There you go, which will be sent to you if you've registered for this group today. So again, I want to say thank you so much. Has anybody got any final words they would like to say very quickly before we break off?
I'd like to say that I'm very proud of AJ and Linda as our brother and sister are doing great things.
Thanks, Joe. We're proud of you
Thank
too.
you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a brilliant session, way too short, but it's just lovely to see you all, and lovely to know so many people were there listening. Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good night. Stay safe.
Cheers.